Synesthesia is a condition where your brain associates sensory information with another unrelated sense. An example of this would be hearing a piano note causing you to feel a salty taste in your mouth. One of the most common types of synesthesia is grapheme color synesthesia. This type of synesthesia is where an individual takes something like a letter, a number, a word, etc., and associates it with a color. For example, whenever you see the number 5, you think of the color orange, or you just think of 5 as a very orange number. I have color grapheme synesthesia, and I've had it ever since I was really young, and where it has always been the most strong to me is within the months of the year. Ever since I was a kid, I have viewed these colors as the months for each year, to the point that I have been using these colors in my schedule system for as long as I can remember. Having this intense of a color association with the months got me curious. How do other people view the months? Back on the 20th of April, I asked you guys this question, alongside a couple of others, and I got a grand total of 2,064 responses. In this video, I'll be detailing what I found. But first, how exactly does one ask people what color is each month? Well, I firstly had to impose some limitations. If I just let people submit any color they wanted to, the data would just become ridiculously painful to sort through, so I created this color palette for people to choose from. It's definitely not perfect, but I figured it was the best I could do to limit things as much as possible while still giving people a fairly wide selection to choose from. That means these colors become these colors. All in all, not a terribly big switch, apart from August. But let's get into what I'm sure most of you guys are interested in, the real cream of the crop, what this video is all about. What color is each month, according to all 2,064 submissions? Starting with January, the winner is light cyan, with a grand total of 448 people choosing it. That's just over 1/5 of everyone, 21.71% to be exact. In second to fourth place, we have sky blue, white, and cyan, with 174, 161, and 159 submissions respectively. Then in fifth place is red with 156 submissions. January was clearly a month that leaned toward the cyan blue shades. The most common reasonings for this that people gave were that it reminded them of snow, ice, and winter. As for red, a lot of people exclaimed that January was red because it was the start of the year and they associate the color red as being the start of something, as it's the first color in the rainbow. On the other end of the spectrum, not a single person chose dark pink for January. This was the singular instance of a color not being chosen for a month, as every single other month had every single color chosen for it at least once. The winning color for February was light pink with a total of 244 submissions. This ended up being a significantly lower percentage of people than January at only 11.82% of submissions. However, right behind is red pink at 213 or 10.32% of the submissions. As you can see, there's still a sizable spike in the blues, with cyan, light cyan, and sky blue pulling larger numbers than most other colors. For many people, the reasoning for these colors in January carried over to February, as a lot of people continue to cite ice and snow in their reasoning for picking the blue colors. However, the pinks and reds here clearly dominate February for one simple reason: Valentine's Day. Next up we have March, whose majority color was green, specifically lime green, with a total of 347 people choosing that. This one ended up being a bit more clear than February, as it was 16.81% of submissions. The other greens ended up directly behind, however, with 289 people choosing dark green, aka the real ones, and 225 people choosing yellow green. Interestingly, if we look at everything except the greens, the hot colors tend to be more chosen than the cool colors. There are 6 hot colors with more than 50 submissions, and not a single cold color above 50. The reasoning for the green ended up being heavily dominated by St. Patrick's Day. However, there were also a handful of people who chose green, viewing March as the start of spring. As for why there were more hot colors than cold colors for March, I honestly did not find any reason for that. There were a handful of people who had the same reasons as each other, such as a couple people choosing red for March because the planet Mars is red, and the two words are almost the same, and people who chose yellow because the sun is coming out more in March. But this wasn't nearly as significant as other months. On to April, whose majority color was also green, however by much less this time, only 206 people, aka 9.98% of the submissions. In second place was yellow-green with 188 submissions, or 9.11%, and third was yellow with 160, or 7.75% of submissions. As you can see, this month did not have any clear consensus whatsoever. In fact, out of all 12 months, this one was statistically the least agreed upon, as 206 was the lowest majority out of any of the months. Because of that, there's not really any particular reasoning that stood out much for this month. There were still a handful of people who chose green and talked about spring, but much less than in March. There were also a decent number of people who talked about Easter, but they all chose different colors when explaining Easter. Some associated Easter with brown because of the chocolate Easter eggs, some associated it with purple because of the color of the Easter eggs, some associated with greens because of the grass or the color of the Easter egg baskets, and some people with white because of the Easter bunny. Likewise, a handful of people also talked about April Fool's Day, but there was zero correlation with what color that ended up being. May, similarly to April, did not have very much agreement on anything, as the most chosen color was yellow with only 243 or 11.77% of submissions. In second place was yellow-green with 174 or 8.43% and green with 132 or 6.4%. For this one, the most common reason people gave was that May is yellow either because of the sun or because it was a transition month between spring and summer. There were also a decent number of people who mentioned the phrase April showers bring Mayflowers, in which those Mayflowers usually were either yellow, pink, or any pastel color. Also, a handful of people chose sky blue and exclaimed that it was because it reminded them of clear weather and an empty sky. June was yellow, just like May was, and only mildly more agreeably so, with 280 submissions saying so, i.e. 13.57%. While May's second and third most colors lean towards green, June's second and third most colors lean towards orange, with yellow-orange and orange taking those spots at 196 and 158 submissions respectively. While the early months of the year, January, February, and March, had submissions focus on very specific colors, June has an interesting pattern where it focuses more on the saturation, as the light and dark colors were chosen significantly less than the most saturated colors, giving us this sort of up and down pattern across the board. Reasons given for coloring June were primarily summer, hot, and dry, especially spanning the yellows and oranges. However, just like May, sky blue also had a spike because people associated this month with having a very clear sky. Now on to July, and for the third month in a row, the winner is yellow, for much of the same reasons as before, although less powerfully so, with only 219 submissions, or 10.61%. The lean towards hot colors becomes even stronger in July than it was for June, as second place is red with 183 submissions, followed by yellow, orange, and orange, again with 172 and 168 respectively. The pattern with saturated colors being chosen more often continues from June to July, and even more powerfully so here, particularly within the hot colors, though it is still present with the cool colors as well. All of these have roughly the same reasoning as June, except with this month being considered the hottest month of the year, hence the lean towards red. There were also a number of people who exclaimed the 4th of July being part of their reasoning, which sort of just goes to show how American-centric this poll ended up being. Almost anyone who talked about the 4th of July gave it either blue or red, citing the American flag. With August, we have finally broken the yellow streak as we continue to lean further towards red, with the number one color chosen being orange with 257 submissions, or 12.45%. The second and third most chosen colors were other shades of orange, i.e. red, orange, and brown, with 241 and 230 submissions each. With August, the streak of the fully saturated colors being chosen more than their light and dark counterparts has also ended. The reasonings for June and July ended up generally continuing, referring to this month as being a very hot month, but there were also quite a few people that viewed this month as the transition into fall, often referring to the start of school again. Then transitioning into September, the most commonly chosen color ended up being brown, with a total of 339 submissions, or 16.42% of them thinking so. This was the most agreed upon month since March, as all the other spring and summer months were more split between a handful of colors. September had much of the same reasoning as August. There were still a number of people who chose the hot colors for representing heat, but reasoning leaned much more powerfully on autumn, with people often citing leaves and mud dictating their choices. So, moving on to October, wow. This was by far the most unanimously agreed upon month. A whole 837 people chose orange for October, which was 40.55% of all submissions. In second and third place, we had brown and red-orange, with 280 and 178 submissions respectively. October was an interesting case in this aspect, because there were two primary reasons people chose a color for this month, and in both cases, that road led straight to orange. Firstly, once again, there was a heavy emphasis on it being autumn, and associating that with leaves, which led to the oranges getting significantly more submissions. However, the primary reason for this orange domination was because of Halloween. Halloween not only led to a significant number of orange submissions, but it also led to a higher than usual number of black submissions at 149. Some of the other darker colors were also a bit higher than their saturated counterparts, also because of Halloween, most notably dark purple. Overall, Halloween ended up being the singular day or event that was most prominent in reasoning across the entire forum. November also had a fairly agreed upon color, being brown, with a total of 517 submissions. Just barely over a quarter of them at 25.05%. The second most chosen submission was gray with 116, and then we have four colors that are exceptionally close. silver in 3rd with 97, orange in 4th with 96, dark blue in 5th with 94, and dark grey in 6th with 91. November ended up being super low in terms of yellows, greens, and pinks, but a little bit higher when it came to oranges, blues, and purples. The grayscale colors also ended up having a bit more submissions than most other months. Just like October, oftentimes the darker colors ended up having more submissions than their lighter counterparts, mainly because people tend to view November as a dark and dreary month. This was part of the reason that brown ended up number 1, but another big reason was that a lot of people associated it with Thanksgiving. The color of the turkey and the color of the stuffing led to many people choosing brown. And finally, we end at December, which had a strong agreement on the official color being white, with 481 submissions choosing it, or 23.3% of the submissions. In second place was light cyan with 219 submissions, and dark blue in 3rd with 156 submissions. As you can see, we had a decently sizable number of people choose the blues, and a little bit into the reds as well, which loops us right back around to January, as those were the strongly chosen color areas in January as well. The most common association here was snow, December often being the first month of snowfall, which did surprise me considering in past months, holidays typically ended up being the most common reason for color. Christmas was still a fairly significant reason for choosing the color of December though. However, just like Easter, the colors chosen for Christmas ended up being much more split. The most common ones were white, usually relating it back to snow or the phrase white Christmas, and the colors red, green, and dark green, all for being the most Christmassy colors. If you want to see all this data a little bit more compactly, I also made this stacked bar chart that shows all of the months together. It's so satisfying seeing the greens fall over time and the oranges grow, and also all the other colors in the same place. If we look strictly at the most chosen colors per month, there are quite a lot of repeats. In fact, 3/4 of the month share their most chosen color with another month. In order to make this a little more satisfying, let's impose a system to ensure that every single month gets a different color. For every single month that does not share a color with another month, great, no need to change that. For each one that does share a color with another month, let's look at specifically how many votes that color got for each month, and whichever month has the highest gets to keep that color and the other months will have to change. March gets to keep green, June gets to keep yellow, October gets to keep orange, and November gets to keep brown. April, May, July, August, and September must now all be a different color, and for that, let's look at the second most voted color option for each of these months. With this, July gets red, August gets red-orange, and September gets yellow-orange. However, May and April have now gone from yellow and green respectively to yellow-green itself, meaning we must do the same process, in which April gets to keep yellow-green. Then with May, oh boy. The third most chosen color was green, which March claimed, so we can't do that. This means we have to move all the way down to the fourth most chosen color, which was light yellow, which it safely gets to keep. That means these are the official colors for each of the months, or these ones if you don't care about repeats. But let's look at this data in a different way. Instead of choosing the color that was the most popular selection, let's average out all 2,064 submissions for each month. Every single color has a specific RGB value, and if we take the values for all 2,064 submissions and average them out, this is what we get. As expected, everything here is fairly grayscale, but we can still see clearly where most of the months lean. March, October, and December lean the strongest towards a single color, being green, orange, and light blue respectively, and we can also see this neat gradient of green to red from March to July. So that's that. Thank you for watching the video, I really hope you enjoyed, and just kidding, I still have a lot of further stats for you guys. The very first question I asked on this form was what country did you grow up in? Overall, I ended up getting responses from people from 90 different countries, which is insanely impressive. The top 5 most common countries were Brazil in 5th place with 52 submissions, Australia in 4th place with 77 submissions, Canada in 3rd place with 126 submissions, the United Kingdom in 2nd place with 148 submissions, and, you guessed it, United States in 1st place with a truly astonishing 949 submissions. There were also 78 submissions that did not specify which country they were a part of. A lot of you were confused on why I asked what country you were from, but I thought it would be rather interesting to see if there would be any consistency across countries. Some of the answers specified multiple countries, and for those of you that did that, I ended up going with whichever one you listed first. I predicted that, not for everyone, but for most people, these color associations would be from something very young in their childhood. Quite a number of submissions did indeed specify that they saw a calendar or something similar in their childhood and always associated colors with that from a young age. However, the main reason that I asked this was because I predicted that a lot of the central reasoning behind people's color selection would be the changing of the seasons, which, as you saw already, was very clearly the case. Since countries in the southern hemisphere experience the seasons in opposite months of the year, I wanted to see if that would reflect in the answers to this form, i.e. would southern hemisphere submissions put the hot colors for months like January and February and vice versa for the cold colors? Well, out of all 2,064 submissions, 230 of them were from people who live in the southern hemisphere, which means the ratio of northern to southern hemisphere submissions was about 10 to 1. Not really the greatest ratio, but when we look at the data, there were some significant differences. For January, red ended up being the most chosen color, followed by most of the hot colors. Likewise with February, orange ended up being the biggest selection, followed by the yellows, and then March went right back to red, once again with the hot colors pulling in the most numbers. This made me really happy when I saw it, because it means that my prediction was basically confirmed to be true, as southern hemispherians also submitted hot colors for their hot seasons. However, for many of the other months, things ended up a little bit more mixed bag. For April, the hot colors were still chosen more, with yellow being the number one, but things started to begin leaning towards green. And then, once we get to May, the colors ended up evening out even more, with sky blue and light pink pulling numbers similar to the hot colors. Once we get to June, winter starts in the southern hemisphere, and that is reflected in this chart as the blues ended up being the most common choices. This trend continues into July, leaning ever so slightly more purple, but then surprisingly, August goes to brown. I could not find any good reason for this unfortunately, as there weren't enough submissions with responses explaining why they chose that color. September ended up being the least agreed upon month of the year when it came to the southern hemisphere. There wasn't any consistency whatsoever. Meanwhile, October pretty much matched the northern hemisphere to a T, as the pull of Halloween clearly outmatched the vibe of the seasons. Then November, just like September, ended up with zero consistency whatsoever. And then finally December, which also generally matched December for the full pull, as Christmas being seen as white and red also pulled through here, like Halloween being seen as orange. However, there was a significantly higher red percentage here because of the people that view this month as a hot summer month. Ultimately, while the data here is a lot rougher since there is significantly less submissions from people in the southern hemisphere, it largely does prove my point still. It is also interesting seeing how certain months, such as October and December, lined up super accurately with the northern hemisphere, but others, such as January and June, were completely different. I do wonder what would happen if I got as many southern hemisphere submissions as northern hemisphere submissions, particularly with the months that were a mixed bag such as September and November, but unfortunately I don't have that kind of reach. But that's okay because what I did get was still really interesting either way. I also wanted to check to see if there was anything significant for any individual countries, so I decided to isolate the data for some of the most submitted countries. I'm not going to go through every month for each one individually, but instead only highlight a couple of things that I found interesting. I'll be going through this rather quickly, so feel free to pause if you need to. Firstly, America. Looking exclusively at America, it generally matched the overall results pretty well, as expected since it is half of the submissions. In fact, months whose colors were dominated by a specific holiday, such as February, March, October, and November, ended up leaning even more powerfully on those most chosen colors, indicating that holidays are a more important reason for Americans than other countries. I only found two major differences. April, the least agreed upon month overall, was even less agreed upon for Americans, and July leaned more on red than the overall agreed upon yellow. For the United Kingdom, I also found a couple of things interesting. Firstly, the UK was also fairly dominated by specific holidays, but not as heavily so compared to the US. Particularly, February had a much more spread out color scheme rather than being more dominated by the pinks. The UK also had a much more strong agreement on April being in the greens compared to the US. And finally, light pink was actually significantly more likely to be chosen for May than any other country. I predict this is because the saying of April showers bring May flowers is more well known in the UK, considering it was written by an Englishman. However, there weren't enough submissions for me to be sure of that. The data for Canada was, and I hate to say this about my own country, but completely unremarkable. Actually, it was basically the same as America, with a bit heavier emphasis on the months with a specific holiday. I guess that does make sense though, since Canada and America are fairly similar culturally. Australia, on the other hand, pretty much matched the southern hemisphere to a T, which makes sense as 1/3 of all the southern hemisphere submissions were from Australia. The only major differences that I noticed when looking at only Australia instead of the entire southern hemisphere was that August ended up being more heavily dark red, and the grayscales, particularly black, really pulled through in November. Brazil, like Australia, generally matched the southern hemisphere as well, but much less consistently so, as several of the months, especially November, didn't really have any pattern to them whatsoever. Brazil still generally had the pattern of January to March being the reds and oranges, and June and July in the blues though. And then every other country past this point really just did not have enough data for me to be able to pick anything significant out from them, unfortunately. Here's a chart that shows the average color for all the countries that I talked about, plus the Philippines and Poland, who were the 6th and 7th most submitted countries respectively. Some months, like April, are pretty consistent across the countries, while others such as July are completely different. It's also rather interesting seeing orange very clearly dominate for October in all countries except for Brazil, which actually leans towards a purplish pink. Alright, that's enough with the countries. Another thing I wanted to check was exclusively people who had synesthesia. I asked all 2,064 people if they had synesthesia, and a total of 199, or just under 10%, answered yes. I do realize now that I should have specified grapheme color synesthesia, as that is what this form is looking into, but oh well, it's a bit too late for that. What I expected was that for those who answered that they did have synesthesia, there would be a much lower correlation between the colors of the months and the seasons and holidays. I thought that people with synesthesia would either have associations more heavily based on other things, or just be more random. However, no, those who answered that they had synesthesia generally matched the data of those who answered that they didn't have synesthesia, or they didn't know. There were only two semi-notable differences, and those were that April had a much stronger red association, and June had a much stronger orange association. Neither of these I could find any concrete reason for, so I'm just going to chalk this one up to random chance. I also asked you two more questions on this poll. What was your favorite month, and what was your favorite color? For favorite month, the most popular month ended up being December with 271 votes, or 13.1% of submissions. This did not surprise me, considering Christmas and all. In second place was October with 258 votes, or 12.5%, also not surprising because of Halloween. Then in third was June with 210 votes, or 10.2%. The least popular month was February with 98 votes, or 4.7%. As for favorite colors, the most popular color ended up being sky blue at 152, or 7.4% of submissions, followed by cyan at 121, or 5.9%, and then bluish green at 116, or 5.6%. The reason why I asked these two questions was because I was curious if there were any interesting correlations between your favorite color or month and how you view that month. And the answer to that question was no. There were literally no significant differences to the data whatsoever, so I have nothing to talk about here. It kind of sucks that I don't really have anything to say for this segment, but at the very least I can pretty much confirm that your favorite month and favorite color do not really have any correlation to each other. Alright, so what have we learned in this video? We have learned that the color associations for the months of the year largely depends on the seasons. We have also learned that if there is a particular holiday in a particular month, then that holiday is also usually quite important. And, more than anything, Halloween trumps all. But now, for this final segment, I want us to unlearn everything we learned in this video. Or, not quite unlearn, but by the end of this video, we'll finish with a net zero gained brain cells. On the very last question of the form, I asked you guys to give me reasoning for why you selected the colors that you did for each month. I ended up reading every single one, or well, almost every single one of those, and it helped gain a clearer picture into the larger patterns across the board. But, through reading those, I also found a lot of really funny stupid shit. So, I'm just gonna read all the dumb things I found that made me laugh. Cyan remembers me of water, and I choked on water last March. I'm not doing that because I'm a lazy little lady. Fish.
Gotta be asked. Sorry.
I dunno for June. Maybe it feels like it is about innovation? I chose black for September due to my crazy ex and I getting together in that month. January is gray because it sucks. They're the colors I think Chris Pratt would choose, and he is my role model. For the synesthesia question, I thought it's a disease. November is gray because it is the most nothing burger month that just feels like a chore. August is red because it's hot as f shit and I hate it. January, hot and miserable. February, hot and less miserable. June is booba, July is Kiki, they are twins. Holidays with my family sucked ass and were stressful. But anyways, that is all for this video. Flashing across the screen right now are the charts for each individual color, showcasing how many submissions it got across the year. I know this video is a bit different to what I normally do, but I really hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun polling everyone and looking at the data, and I could definitely do something similar again, except with something other than months. If you have any suggestions, let me know. But yeah, that's all. Thank you for watching.